Clearly, we would be delighted if you could arrange for flags at the airport, but I cannot claim that Mr. Hogg is either head of state, head of government, or foreign minister.
He's not the head of foreign ministers.
No, he's not. I mean, the foreign minister is Mr. Hurd.
Oh, yeah.
So I cannot claim that he holds that position. What other answer can I give you?
We can put the flags, the little flags, on the table, for example. Yes. But at the airport, it is out of our protocol practice because of his position in the Foreign Office.
I shall explain this to London. I'm sure they'll understand. The Belarusians have been very good about signing documents declaring themselves to be a nuclear-free state, and there's a process which continues of physically shipping the nuclear warheads onto Russian territory. I don't think anybody realized the beginning of this, just how difficult it is to move, let alone to destroy nuclear warheads. So it's something that we want to be around to not keep an eye on, but just to watch gently and to make sure that nothing goes wrong. I hardly need to say that if anything did go wrong, the consequences could be really quite worrying.
Here in Azerbaijan, the instability that followed the breakup of the Soviet Union has resulted in war. A long-running territorial dispute with neighboring Armenia escalated into conflict once both countries broke free of Moscow's rule. Once again, the British Chargé d'Affaires residence is a hotel bedroom. Harold Formstone is a Department of Trade and Industry man seconded to the Foreign Office.
I'm going to prepare some clean water for myself because the water in this place comes out like brown Windsor soup. I try to eat, well, let's put it this way. Eating out here is a bit of a problem in as far as the food the first time is okay. The second time it's not so bad, but the third time it's getting a bit boring. And the fourth time, it's extremely boring. So I like to have a little snack up here once or twice a week with my tin of ham or tin of corned beef or a few tomatoes I bought in the market. It's probably the best little hotel in Baku, which isn't saying a great deal. No, it's okay, actually. They look after me very well. I'm part of the family now. The ladies in the... who come and do the cleaning regarded me as a son more than a guest. And when I arrange my things around the room, they always have better ideas and they change it around yet again. And, women always know best, don't they? I was sent here by the Foreign Office to develop trade relations with Azerbaijan, which, as an independent country, have never been developed before. So my job was to find out how trade works here, how industry works here, who the contacts are, what the priority sectors are for British companies, what are they most likely to need first, what can they pay for first, because they ain't got a great deal of money. That will come, of course, when the oil companies start pumping oil at the Caspian Sea there, but right now, they just ain't got no dough.
Azerbaijan was one of the great oil-producing areas of the Soviet Union.
Moscow needed oil for itself and for its balance of payments. They had little care for the environment. They just wanted oil. However much we can make, as soon as we can get out of the ground, let's get the bloody stuff out of the ground. Let's get it into a tanker and off to Moscow or off to the west or wherever, The result is that all around Baku, there are old oil fields which like a lunar landscape. The Russians took our oil north, and what are we left with? This bloody mess. Now, BP saw this as an opportunity in terms of their long-term requirements for oil. And the British government perceived the interests of BP as being in line with its own. So we identified, in terms of the former Soviet Union, Azerbaijan as a country for priority treatment in terms of government support for commercial ventures. because the BP venture was so demonstrably in our interest, and it was just huge, you know? So they sent me.
BP and the other Western oil companies believed that an oil-producing agreement with the Azeris would be worth up to £16 billion. Today, Harold takes a visiting British engineer to an old Soviet oil rig so that he can assess its efficiency.
Will those be manually operated, or is just for in case something goes wrong?
Yeah, these are all manually operated by the looks of it. And North Sea will have just automatic operations.
Yeah.
North Sea, they'll all be linked into shutdown systems up here. If something goes wrong, some of the guys got to come in and turn all the valves themselves.
What do you think of it so far?
I think I've reserved judgment at the moment, Harold.
Well, we've obviously got some problems on the old spare parts, yeah?
Sounds like it.
The influx of Western technology and Western investment depends vitally on the oil companies signing their agreements with the state oil company. And they cannot invest heavily without, having a piece of paper which says that they've got a contract. BP have been working hard for 7 or 8 months now, since September, and they're not far off reaching an agreement, but things still could go wrong. The British Embassy is this broom cupboard in BP's office. Luckily, as chaps, we get on pretty well, you know?
Harold has had a number of secondments to the Foreign Office, but given his Department of Trade background, he is unlikely to become the ambassador in Baku.
I guess when the brightest and the finest join the Foreign Office, they see their careers as leading up to an ambassador, and leading up to an ambassador mainly through political work. And I think that's just part of the natural system. But I don't think there's any sort of policy in the FCO which denigrates or puts in second place commercial work. I mean, it's work that has to be done. The Foreign Office has been given that responsibility. And I think they try and find the best blokes to do the work.
I mean, those guys here.
So what's the story, darling? No change, no facts.
No facts yet, I'm just...
Facts all.
Facts all.
This is not Harold's first posting to the Soviet Union. He was in the Moscow embassy in the early 70s.
I was kicked out in 71. It's one of these spy exchanges. The British, of course, were innocent, and the Russians or the Soviets weren't. So against that background, perhaps even more than some other people, I do, in fact, find it astonishing that the changes that are taking place, but perhaps even more the pace of the way in which things are taking place. I guess some people might say it would be inevitable that the communist empire would eventually have broken down. But the speed in which it's happened is breathtaking.
Azerbaijan is hesitantly embracing Western capitalism. Harold's job is to give advice to visiting British businessmen.
It's going to take some time to work that through. Let's hope the new team the President's put in place will try to... And they're in a bit of a bind because they have to progress, but on what basis they progress, all they know is the old system, right?
No, that's right.
Well, so we've got to help them, I think, to, which sounds a bit patronising, which the fact of life is to help them to understand.
That's the difficult bit. They don't want to be patronised, and it's very difficult to avoid going in and say, right, fellas, we know how to do this.
We'll do it. Yeah.
We'll do it. And they think, well, we're actually doing it for 90 years. Well, it's not...
99% of my time has been spent on trade promotion. Until February, I guess, when the political events in this country and the military events in this country started to go slightly awry, that the war started to go wrong. I mean, I guess war can never go right, but the fortunes of Azerbaijan started to get worse. People are being killed in large numbers every day. It's a war that I personally think neither Azerbaijan nor Armenia really wants to fight. It's over a question of disputed territory. I was brought in quite a lot. A, to pass messages to the government here, and also to make it very clear to them what my government's position was, to say that, while we support the peace process, and we want this to be solved through the CSCE, but meanwhile the British government recognises the problems of Azerbaijan and has given support to the UN resolutions which have been favourable in Azerbaijan's interest. Здравствуйте, как вы поживаете?
Спасибо.
Он там? Спасибо. I've been lucky enough to have sort of 4 secondments to the FCO, so I know how to operate overseas. I know how to get access to the ministers. You know, just bang on the door and walk in and say, here I am, this is what I've got to tell you. I've had an inquiry from the government about these Russian soldiers that have been condemned to death. And I understand that they've appealed to the president for clemency. Yes. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is it 5 or 6 soldiers, by the way?
You see, it's 6 soldiers.
Yeah.
And they took part in fighting against Azerbaijanians in Armenian side.
Yeah.
And they were captured. It is not only these soldiers. We have a lot of prisoners of war, Russians.
Yeah, but these particular Russians have been given the death sentence, yeah?
Yes, because one of them, he was sentenced for 15 years.
Yeah.
And others, death sentence because they had big crimes. They killed a lot of people.
Yeah. Okay. So they had an appeal, and the appeal is being considered by the Milli Majlis and by the president, yeah?
Of course, of course.
Okay.
The main difficulty is, you see, we must think about the situation, internal situation in Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
Because our people suffered a lot from these hostilities.
I know.
And everybody is talking that Armenians are fighting better than you are.
Yeah.
But they haven't any prisoners of war Russians that were fighting on our side.
Mm-hmm. So the fact that these Russians were captured is quite politically important, obviously. Yeah, symbolic almost. Okay. If the war goes on and drags on and drags on, and if other influences and other powers in the area continue to be involved, there is a possibility, particularly if things go wrong in Moscow, that it could revert back to the old system.
Harold receives a call from BP's headquarters in London.
Well, look, I'm in my hotel room at the moment, and I'm going back to the office any minute now. So, now, who have you spoken to in the Foreign Office? Well, I mean, if I'm going to speak to the government, I want to be bloody sure that the London and indeed Moscow agree with the line. I mean, the British government can certainly speak on my own behalf, but it can't make a démarche of a complaint against the Azeri government if they think they're acting in their own best interests, and our interests are not being preferentially damaged, you see. All right, Eddie. Okay, my dear sir. Depend on me. God bless. Bye. Oh dear. It looks as if the State Oil Company has decided it wants to move quickly, and to do so it has to so arrange things which are quite contrary to the agreements they've already come to with the foreign oil companies. Which means BP's 2 agreements, the initial agreement and the preliminary agreement, out the window. I've got to see my main contact in the presidential office this afternoon about this this problem that's come up. There's potential that it could undermine some, if not all, of the work that's been done by BP over the last year or so, and indeed my own work here. This is high-risk business for BP. And they're conducting their negotiations against a quite unstable political background. The war's still going on,
The country has only just begun to establish its democracy, and we have to make every effort to make sure that if there is something we can do, that we do it and that we say it.
Paul Byrne, the newly arrived British chargé d'affaires in Tashkent, is hoping to buy a second-hand car.
Almaty. Got over there.
It'll probably take some months before London sends a car out, and the alternative is to rent a car. But that's rather expensive. And if I buy a car, I'm told by those who know that it's very easy to sell again. So if I use a car for, say, 6 months to a year, I or whoever comes after me can sell it easily, provided I get a good one.
I'm an absolute whiz kid on Russian cars. I'm learning.
I have always been attracted by the area because I suppose, like everybody else who read books about and became involved in the memory of the, quote, great game, unquote, I conceived enthusiasm for the area early on. And when I was serving in Iran, for example, I often used to look down on this part of the world from the mountains in northeast Iran and think, I wonder if I'll ever get there. Of course, it seemed sort of unattainable and romantic. And here I am. And the sequence of events which have led to that, to my posting here, were, to me, really completely unpredictable, I'm bound to say. I mean, a lot of people say, so didn't you foresee the collapse of the Soviet Union? And I'm bound to say I didn't.
A hotel bedroom with unreliable telephones is not an ideal location for an embassy. Paul hopes to find a permanent site as soon as possible.
Well, of course, the posting came as a surprise to me. It did mean having to leave my family at home, both my wife, who will only be able to join me for limited periods, and my mother also happens to be very ill. So leaving her has been difficult. We're looking for staff, locally engaged staff, and what I'm really looking for is, in fact, somebody who would act as a receptionist, as a sort of interface with the local government, and as a typist. This here is the British Embassy. Welcome. Tell me about yourself. Have you understood everything I said?
Yes, of course.
Where did you learn your English?
You see, I've graduated from the Institute of Foreign Languages. Now it is a University of World Languages, and I graduated it in 1973. Then I was a postgraduate student in Moscow. I was making a thesis in the field of the history of English grammars.
The history of English
grammars.
What I'm getting on this particular occasion is a professor of English linguistics, but why are you interested in changing to this sort of work? What appeals to you about this sort of work?
First of all, it is the field where I can learn English better. But sincerely speaking, it is also economical point of view, maybe you say, because in nowadays is very hard in our republic to just give enough money for teachers at the universities.
A professor's salary is not such as you can easily live on. I imagine it'll be the equivalent of £20 a month, something like that.
You don't have a telephone, do you? That's right.
We are arriving at 6 o'clock in the afternoon.
Between 6 and 6:30, yes.
Yeah, approximately, but in any case, we are ready for it. We divided enough quantity of the cars, one Cheka, the old one he likes.
Within days of his own arrival, Paul has to prepare for an important visit. A delegation from the Department of Trade and Industry and the Foreign Office in London, led by the British ambassador in Moscow.
I understand that under the Vienna Convention, things like the sort of airport charges for the airplane are not imposed for diplomatic visits. Is that right? I mentioned this to Mr.
So, all the charges in airports, so they will pay, the crew themselves will organize.
The crew pay the hotel and so on, but as far as, the normal charges, landing charges, the handling charges for the aircraft, these are not normally charged for diplomatic visits. Fuel, yes. But the sort
you
of...
ask the rubles also?
Yes.
Britain's ambassador to Russia, Sir Brian Fall, is also the non-resident ambassador to many of the new states where British embassies have recently been opened, including Belarus, Azerbaijan, and here in Uzbekistan.
There are a lot of areas in which British-Uzbek relations could be thickened up, in the commercial area, cultural area, scientific area, and so on. And this delegation is a response to that. They do have very bad economic problems as a result of the collapse of the Soviet and now the Russian economy. But they do have good mineral resources. They have a lot of natural gas, they have gold, they have other minerals. And it's a very fertile area in principle.
The talks begin with a meeting between Sir Brian and the Uzbek foreign minister. The British want to persuade the Uzbeks to invest their gold reserves in London, but they are facing tough competition.
During the last visit to Germany, President stressed out once more that we need assistance in this case. Right. And when we met the positive reaction from German side, we began to act immediately. And just in 1 week after the visit, the significant portion of Uzbek gold was sent to Germany. And we are ready to deal with as well with British
well, I
banks.
hope Derek Thomas of Sir Derek Thomas of Rothschilds
he will
is
soon
coming
here
on Sunday.
Yes.
And I've been in contact with him and he with me. They would very much like to be involved in this area. I think they believe that there is room for more than one foreign partner and that it would probably be good for Uzbekistan to have a position in the London market as well, which, as you know, is traditionally the bullion center. And I hope very much that you might be prepared to see Thomas when he arrives, if you can.
I'd like it.
Uzbekistan is, I forget exactly what, but about the 5th largest gold producer in the world, and they're hoping to increase their gold production. And clearly, you don't just sit on your gold in a sort of cellar in the center of Tashkent, or not all of it anyway. You send it out to people who know how to profit from it.
Successful. If it's not a confidential document, I'd be very grateful if you could let us see a copy of the agreement with Chancellor Kohl. Mm-hmm. If some sort of a governmental exchange of letters would be helpful in providing the umbrella for this sort of cooperation, then I think perhaps we ought to look again at that. I'm speaking as a non-expert, but I mean, I can assure you that Rothschilds, who've been doing business with the British government for at least 100 years, are perfectly good people to do business with in this area. I mean, it's highly confidential part of work. It's very specialized, and they're the ones who have the experience. But I think that we can easily look perhaps for an exchange of letters format. And as I say, if you could let me see what you already have with the Germans, it will be interesting to us to see how that has gone.
Later that day, the British and Uzbek delegates divide into small working groups. Paul chairs one about cooperation on measures to fight drug smuggling.
We didn't have the problem of narcotic smuggling in the former USSR because there was a special system of control, and we didn't even have the facts of narcotic smuggling. В принципе, это было связано с закрытостью общества, там, так сказать. The fact that it was a society of a closed type. Как это на Западе говорилось, железный занавес существовал. There was an iron curtain. Usually, the customs committee only, how can I say, states the fact of smuggling of narcotics, but the investigation is made by the National Security Service.
Well, I mean, I don't think we mind who we train. It so happens that our experts in this field sit in the Customs and Excise. But if you are interested, and maybe you can, this would be an opportunity to invite for this afternoon or tomorrow morning representatives of the other interested ministries to come and discuss this. But our Customs and Excise law enforcement officers would, I'm sure, be happy to accept trainees from any of the interested departments here.
Всем этим перечисленным отраслям.
I think his preferred way forward is if we can find British companies, British farmers who would be interested in the establishment of joint ventures in those particular areas.
That doesn't bode well.
You know, already quite a number of countries have recognised that the level of risk in Uzbekistan is somewhat lower than in other countries. A hard-working population. They have the very fertile land, and that within a period of 2 or 3 years you should be able to see some kind of return on your investment.
But I mean, this point on how you want to, I mean, they've got all this cotton, which is their you know, as he said, is their major material. They want to process it here. I mean, what are they doing with all the hard currency from this cotton? You know, why can't it buy processing machinery?
I think the Foreign Office is not particularly good traditionally at commercial work. It's not that they're not interested. I think all the ambassadors I've ever worked for have been deeply interested in commercial work, but some of them haven't really known how to be effective. But I don't think it's lack of interest. I think there is a lack of skill. That could be solved and is being solved by bringing people in who can give advice through direct experience of commerce. I don't think perhaps people have yet decided how much the Foreign Office should try and help British business. Know what British business has a right to expect from a Foreign Office which right now has suffered massive cuts in the last 15 years. I got back here at midnight, sort of collapsed into bed at 12:30, and at 1:30 the telephone rang. Well, you know, I'm worried about the situation back home in the family, and so I don't feel I can actually not answer the telephone in case it's my wife saying your mother's got worse or something like this. So I pick up the telephone. Do you want girl? No. Do you want sex? No. Do you want to make love to me? This endless series of appalling propositions. You slam down the telephone in a fury, but then you can't get back to sleep because you've been wrenched out of the depths of sleep. So the sooner one gets out of this hotel, the better, I guess. The future for me, I don't really know. I mean, I think that there's some sort of chance that they might say, well, okay, you're the man who knows how the plumbing works in the new embassy. Wouldn't you like to stay on and be the ambassador? Of course, or you know, if they were to do that, then I'd be very pleased, clearly. But it won't necessarily happen. I don't mind at all working on my own, provided there are occasional indications that not everybody has forgotten I'm here. Ma? It's me. I'm sitting in the 10th floor of a hotel in Tashkent, and I've just rigged up my satellite station. Isn't that good? Yes, I'm afraid that's right. It does echo, but still, beggars can't be choosers. Well, it's a lot of hard work just at present. Yeah. I had a delegation from Moscow and I had to fix up their program and that sort of thing. Talk to ministers and presidents and kings and things. Yeah. And I hear you've come off the morphine. And you sort of recovered from coming off it a bit. Nearly. I'll try. Yes, I do. I read quite a lot, in fact, at night. And to you. Bye now. Bye.
Now to make
is likely to be an important, if not a decisive factor, frequently in what the EC position will be.
Okay, well,
you always assume that inspectors come with a brief to cut, and a great deal of time and effort goes into preparing your case. Your assumption tends to be that almost anything the embassy produces as a case will nevertheless not save every aspect of what we do.
You've got your entertainment allowance. How reasonable is that for what you have to do?
I think it's all right. I mean, it means I have to actually think about it fairly carefully and not just take everyone out to lunch. For some reason, quite a lot of people pay to take me out to lunch, which I never quite understood.
The Foreign Office must justify its overseas living and entertainment allowances to the Treasury. Inspectors question the cost and necessity of every item, from tips to toilet rolls, from cars to cleaners.
Right. I think you probably know what this is about. I mean, basically we're looking at allowances.
Yeah.
What we try to do is to ensure that we are able to tell the Treasury the cost of the style of life which you're leading. You're married and on a joint posting.
That's right.
So your husband's here.
Yeah, and he's a first secretary as well on the political side.
Right. I mean, he's perfectly welcome to join in if you want.
He deals with Somalia and Yugoslavia, so I thought about trying to find a time, but decided it's better if you just saw me. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
You reckon that you do only about 100 phone calls a year, 2 a week, from home?
It's very difficult to estimate. It's not obviously something you write down. I mean, last weekend I must have done about 10 official phone calls, maybe, but that was unusual. It could be an underestimate, that I agree. If other people's estimates are considerably higher, then I think that I may be a bit out of line.
Well, I'll tell you what, give some thought to it, and if you think it really is on the low side, come back to me on it.
So we would do a big drinks party and sort of sweep everybody out of that, and do most of our entertaining at lunchtime, doing it as a business lunches.
Right.
I mean, it's not in terms of budget. You know, a couple of big drinks parties can use up quite a lot of.
Yes.
And we feel it's worth. You know, it's something we want to do to show that we are having invited people to our home.
Right.
And we hope in the summer to do a couple of brunches. My predecessor said were a good way of getting Americans out. I don't see us sort of doing a dinner party a week.
Right.
Realistically, given the hours that we're working.
If this were a house where you weren't representational, where you weren't having to entertain, do you think you would have spent rather less than the $100 on your plants and fertiliser and things like that? Do you think, in other words, that some of the expenditure you had you put in because you have to maintain a house which is a bit posher and a bit more representational? Have to make a bit more of a show.
I think so. I mean, how can you be precise?
Well,
you can't really. I mean,
like
60-40, I would say, possibly.
Which way round?
60 under other costs and 40 under representational.
Well, let's put that then.
In the past, we were rather looked upon as the people that nitpicked. I don't think we are now seen as quite as bad as that. We don't count the pencils anymore. We don't make sure that the right forms are being used all the time. Yes, we do look at procedures. We have to ensure that the procedures are correct. But people are much more irritated by inspectors seizing on small items.
You put down for bottled water. Have you got real problems in?
Well, this looks odd, and if you come from Europe, you'd say, well, surely the tap water is fine in Washington D.C. But for some reason I've never discovered it is not pleasant to drink, and it's very much the sort of standard behaviour here to drink bottled water.
Bottled water,
We drink, for drinking water, we don't use, the tap water is pretty heavily chlorinated here,
Right.
not terribly nice.
I think you may know that we can only actually put bottled water as an addition on cola if after boiling and filtering the water it's certified as not being drinkable. We can, and that will have to be certified by a medical authority as such.
One of the main problems with the job is that we're away so long. Our average trip is 10 weeks, and 10 weeks away from, in my case, my wife and 2 small children is actually quite a long time. Apart from that, there is also the fact that you are working minimum 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week. There is the other point that what you're doing may not always be entirely palatable to the people in the embassy, so one has to negotiate with them. So there's quite a high stress factor in it.
While the inspection in Washington continues, 2 of the inspectors have come to New York to evaluate the Foreign Office's trade work.
I think that there's a certain sort of joke element about it. I mean, the inspectors are coming, this is the ogres and so forth. And to some extent there is an element of suspicion, an element of concern. I think that's probably a good thing. It puts people on their toes. It makes them sort of think carefully beforehand exactly what they're doing, why they need to be doing it, how they're doing it.
For decades, the idea of assisting British industry abroad was rather beneath the dignity of high-flying diplomats. But now that market forces reign supreme, the Foreign Office has discovered an enthusiasm for trade work that it hopes will minimize the Treasury's cuts. Here at the New York Trade Office, however, the inspectors fear that too much time is spent on helping big British companies invest in America. Does it really benefit the UK economy?
The days when helping companies to invest overseas was seen as exporting jobs, I thought had long gone.
No, I mean, I think perhaps we're not too far removed. I say, if investing overseas is going to bring back profits, I mean, they're going to repatriate profits.
Right.
That, to my mind, is a form of exporting.
Yes.
But if it's not going to do that, if you're simply going to set up a company, or employ people overseas and work overseas, and there's going to be no return, there's going to be no visible sort of from export result, I don't see that's our job.
If there's no return, then the company would go out of business.
I don't know, no repatriated return, I mean.
But I think pretty well, maybe some exceptions, but pretty well, British companies repatriate profits to Britain.
Yeah, but those who do that are doing the job that they're doing very well, and I think without much need of our assistance.
Not necessarily.
I'm talking about, the one you mentioned, Cadbury's Beverages, Cadbury Schweppes, BP, British Aerospace, all of these people, They don't, why would they need BTIO?
In all our briefing in London, which we got a lot of, particularly on the export promotion side, we haven't heard mention of this activity. Now that may be a weakness in the system in London.
Well, it's one of the many weaknesses,
Sure.
either in the briefing system or in your hearing system, but one or the other has fallen down badly.
It's not the hearing system, I can show you that.
I'm flabbergasted. I'm absolutely flabbergasted.
We'd need to hear from them, some more convincing arguments than those we'd so far heard, if we were to sort of change our perception at all.
Mm-hmm.
So we left on good terms, but not having agreed anything.
But it would have to be a clear understanding that...
The inspectors believe that the New York office has its priorities wrong, and that one of its managers should go. The two senior posts should be merged into one.
No, I think that's what we should try and shoot for, don't you? I think they'll be resistant to the idea, but I should emphasize that we're open to hear their views too, particularly at their most senior level, Consul General level.
I have to confess that that is a totally new idea to me, which I hadn't even considered, even though I had been looking around for really radical solutions. Chiefly, I think, because I had been convinced that both of them were doing full-scale grade 4 jobs by comparison with a good many I'd known.
There was a difference between us over the measurement of how much the policy was taking. He, and I don't want to misquote him, but I think I'm fairly certain that he said that essentially policy took him 45% of his time. I must say I couldn't find the evidence, either in discussion or from the files that we've been shown, to suggest that there was
that much policy,
anything like that much policy. I was left with the feeling that there was essentially half a council level job. Now, I wouldn't deny, that, because, particularly John is a very active man. I mean, he would fill his time, but I would be very concerned that he would start to fill his time, as to an extent he's now doing, with work below his true level.
It's likely to me. One or other of us probably going back to London until they can find us another job, which is thought to be worth doing. It doesn't mean the dole, and I wouldn't pretend that it is therefore in any sense easily equated to someone else getting the sack. But what I will say is it now gives me some first-hand, some inkling at first-hand of how that feels.
What we're proposing is fairly radical, although it sounds rather sort of a sweeping word, but it obviously wasn't entirely expected. If we genuinely can't reach an agreement, here in New York, then it has to go back to London, and more senior people than I have to decide.
New York is also the headquarters of the United Nations. The end of the Cold War has broken years of stalemate in the Security Council. This has given greater importance to Britain's membership of the exclusive P5 group, the 5 permanent members who dominate the Council. Britain's power in the Security Council is its main source of diplomatic influence in the world today. One floor below the Trade Office is the Foreign Office's mission to the UN. 2 other inspectors have arrived to consider a request for extra staff. Every morning, the mission discusses tactics in a meeting chaired by the ambassador, Sir David Hannay.
So I then took Hatano through a rather complicated game plan, which I'm now trying to talk Mérimée through as well, which would basically involve us having a P5 at 12 o'clock today.
This is far, far busier than any post I've ever inspected because of what's happened with the United Nations over the last 2, 3, 4 years.
But the Chinese probably don't want to be associated.
I mean, they are reacting all the time to the various crises which are driving the Security Council business forward literally on a daily basis. And so they're just running like crazy to keep up.
Yes, he's a bizarre man in that way.
Hi. Is now as good a time as any?
Bob Pierce is a first secretary. He covers UN policy on Yugoslavia.
Okay, right.
Well, today is not a typical day because I've just returned from a few days sick with an ulcer, and my doctor tells me I'm exhausted, so I am to some extent a living example of the way that we try to have an active foreign policy but are not prepared to pay for the resources we need to implement it.
We regret that a political settlement has not yet been achieved. But the United Nations cannot simply impose a political solution. The only way to enforce peace in that way would be the dispatch of a massive army to be deployed in Bosnia for an indefinite period. No government has seriously suggested that.
I believe that we are well led by the ambassador. I mean, that does very good things for my morale, to know that we have, you know, the cleverest chap on the Security Council is our man, and we generally get what we want done.
That is how we see the proposal to lift the arms embargo.
I'm not one of those people who goes around grumbling that the mission is poorly managed. I mean, we are understaffed. We have no capacity to deal with anybody's leave. And when someone falls sick, several other people have to work till 2 o'clock in the morning. You know, the idea of taking a long weekend here and there, I mean, it would just be considered sort of downright antisocial. I mean, you're sort of deliberately ruining someone else's life. Before Christmas, for 3 months in a row, without remit, I was working from 8 until midnight or beyond, constantly. So that's what gets people down. It's the hours.
A lot of people feel undervalued. They feel that they are, there's a lack of positive feedback. I mean, that's a phrase which has been used on 1 or 2 occasions. I think they feel a lot of the time that they are regarded purely as providers of work, as doers of the business, and not a lot of the time as human beings.
Yeah. So, I mean, I worked actually with our current head of registry. He was my head of registry in Riyadh during the Gulf War, and I mean, he's one of the best of chaps, and I saw him when I was in Riyadh a great deal more than I managed to see him here. And you had time to joke with him and chat and stop and, you know, think about what was going on. And we had our own post-management committee and the security committee, and he'd be involved in that and so on. These are luxuries that I do not have time for here. Now, you're right, I should make time for it. I should make time for it. But they go out of the window when you have cables, you know, that depth of cables to read in 5 minutes before you get to the next Security Council meeting.
It was never a big piece of post.
No, but the statistics showed it, and therefore what I'd written on the details.
Oh, sir, what service? Thank you. You're going to freeze to death.
I don't know anybody who leaves the inspectorate having regretted doing the job. The nature of the work, you know, just has to stand you in good stead in terms of what somebody in my position can reasonably look forward to, which is, you know, a head of mission job. If you spent 2 years, you know, looking at the way missions are run, it obviously is a good grounding for, you know, that next step up to running your own show.
British Consulate General in Atlanta is one of 11 consulates spread throughout the United States.
Thank you so much. Last time I came in, he gave me the visa.
The consulates mainly promote trade, but they also help Britons who are in trouble in America.
Do the customs, you get charged your customs at the
Peter Harborne's inspection team has just arrived.
Hello. Morning. I'm pleased to meet you.
Peter Harborne, nice to meet you.
Hello, Marion Bennington. Hello. Nice to see you've got name badges on. First post I've been to where people are actually wearing name badges at the counter. Great.
Can I just have a look at it?
The office in Atlanta is run by 3 diplomats from London.
No, you don't need to. That's just.
The other 18 staff are all employed locally, so their jobs are on the line. If the inspectors decide they are not needed, they will be out of a job.
Oh, the static.
A little shock.
Yeah.
Hello, Marion Bennington.
Nice
Hello.
to meet you. Hello again.
Hello. Oh, Marion, please. Oh, all right.
Are there any staff problems that we should be aware of? I mean, any personnel management type problems, or any not up to snuff problems, or?
Well, I mean, I've got probably 3 weaker brethren, or in fact they're sisters, out of my staff here, which I'd like to just talk to you about. There might be something we can do. The problem is one tends in all these situations to inherit people who've been around for years, and other people have either given them good chits or put up with them also. And it's actually quite difficult to come in and find a good reason for them to go. But I think actually we probably do need to move. And I was on one case in particular. And what I was going to do was to elicit your support. And if you could make the right sort of recommendation, I will implement it, if you see what I mean.
The complaints, there are 3 complaints. Attitude of staff. I think, actually, to be perfectly honest with you, they're all about me. Sometimes...
That's nothing like being frank.
When you're dealing with people, vast numbers of people, and they have lost their belongings, or gotten into trouble with the law, or sold their belongings, sold their passport, frittered away all their money, and are sleeping rough on a beach, and then ring up this office, the British Consulate General in Atlanta, pounding their fist on the table, demanding their rights as a British citizen to taxpayers' money to repatriate them back to the United Kingdom. Then when someone like me tells them the basic facts of life and what we can and cannot do for them, sometimes they don't like the answer. Basically, it boils down to something like this. They say, well, what the hell are you there to do then if it's not give me money? And I say, well, we're here to help you. Well, I'm a British citizen, I pay my taxes. I say, well, surely then, being a prudent traveller, you had some insurance when you came over here on a one-way ticket with, $50 in your pocket for well, that's not my fault that I happened to lose all my belongings when I was on Miami Beach. So, well, all you need to do is get money transferred to you from your friends or relatives in the United Kingdom.
And then they're orphans.
I don't have a mother, I don't have a father or brothers or sisters. Well, you must have a job. No, I saved up my 6-month dole money for this trip. So, well, I'm very sorry to hear that. Really, we being the custodians of the British taxpayers' purse strings, cannot authorise British taxpayers' money to be spent on you as easily as that. Now, do you want to go through the whole gamut? Full name, date of birth, place of birth? Go to hell! And they'll put the phone down.
Oh, I know, but that happens all over the world. That happens all over the world.
And some of them write in and say that I wasn't nice to them.
Yeah.
But
I mean, generally speaking, you're happy
generally
with
speaking, they're a good they're a good team, and they're all pretty competent. Some could be a bit more flexible. Some have weaknesses that we can't do anything about, but I think perhaps we can move them into areas where there'll be less damage.
or more good.
Or more good. It's shaking down. They, not wishing to be disloyal, but I mean they haven't had a firm management steer for a long time, and they were all over the shop when I got here. I mean it's a shame, really. It's surprising how good people and true, who've given loyal service year after year after year, can end up so somehow disoriented. I mean, just not really knowing what it's all about.
Because they were not being properly led.
I don't think that they were given a clear idea what it is they were there to do. No.
And they now do have a clear idea.
I hope. Well, you'll have to ask them. But I think they well, it's not through lack of shouting.
We've got 3 or 4 British people serving life sentences in our consular patch. In fact, we had one guy, he's on murder. You know, he's taken the whole thing far too lightly. I don't think he quite understands the brevity of the situation. I saw him just before Christmas. I said to this young guy, "You're in for murder, you know, you've got to take the situation seriously." "Oh, don't tell my folks, don't tell my folks." I said, "Oh, I mean, you've been in prison now for a month, where do they think you are?" "Oh, they think I'm in Miami Beach. I wrote to them the other day saying, having a great time here in Miami Beach, not to worry about me, I'm extending my holiday." I says, "But they frank the mail, prison issue, they'll know you're in prison." "Oh God, oh no, they'll know I'm in prison. Oh, ring them up and tell them I'm all right."
Florida, a place where tourists are increasingly targets of street crime, violence and murder. Yet it is the most popular destination for Britons visiting America. 800,000 come each year. Those who get into trouble here must deal with the Atlanta consulate hundreds of miles north, because the only Foreign Office presence in Miami is a trade office.
Good morning, British Consulate Trade Office. Okay, you need to call Atlanta, Georgia for that information. Well, the thing is, sir, we don't have a consular section here. We're just a trade office.
90% of the telephone calls that we get at this post are consular inquiries. And so although we are supposed to be a commercial office, although we are a commercial office, we spend so much of our time dealing with consular inquiries, only to tell these consular inquiries that, "I'm sorry, we're a commercial office, you must speak to our office in Atlanta." So I think the time has now come is to address the issue of whether we need to have a consular office here in Miami. My view is that we should have one. I think
in Florida,
well, in Florida, preferably in Miami, because that's where all the that's where all the problems occur.
It isn't what the statistics demonstrate, though.
Isn't it?
No, if you actually look at the figures, I mean, you know, unless Atlanta have got it wrong,
right.
One assumes that since the overall consular responsibility is theirs, they've got the figures right.
Right.
The majority of the incidents actually occur in Orlando. My own view is that what we should aim to do is to make you as much as possible what you were set up in business to be, and to get, so far as we possibly can, consular work out of your hair. And as I said, you know, the way my own mind is working is that the best way of doing that would be to set up a small vice consulate office, what we'd call it, in Orlando.
I'm rather saddened that you've come with a decision that you're going to put yourselves in.
We haven't come with any decision, but I mean, you know, we've read a lot of paper.
Right.
We've listened to a lot of people. By this stage, we must have some thoughts on the subject.
Yes.
There was a woman a couple of weeks ago that was badly beaten. I don't know whether she was raped
What
as
were you
well,
able to
but
do?
she was in a terrible state. She was in the reception area. Oh, she was in a terrible state. I mean, her clothes, everything. I mean, they'd stolen everything and they'd beaten her up quite badly. And, you know, I just gave her a cup of tea and told her to call David. So she was talking to David and David helped her out.
Going back to these telephone calls and what have you, do you keep a record of where they come from? I mean, where they're phoning from?
No,
You don't?
No, we don't.
So it's only sort of... I mean, you presumably ask them where they're calling from if they phone, to know whether they're coming from Orlando or they're coming from
Yes,
Miami.
they usually say, you know, we're here,
Mhm.
we're in Orlando, we're in Miami.
And what would be the higher percentage, do you reckon?
Miami, definitely. Yes.
Okay.
There is a difference of view between the Consul General in Atlanta, you know, who has overall responsibility for consular work in these 6 states southeastern states, including Florida, and the consul down here, who, not surprisingly, would really like to see this as a sort of bigger post, doing more things, and being a full consulate general. And that's entirely understandable, and he's under a lot of pressure from the British business community who says, well, X has a consulate general, Y has a consulate general, Z has a consulate general, why don't the Brits have a consulate general?
Peter is an A-stream officer. You'll never get an A-stream officer being the consul, doing the prison visiting and what have you, or the management officer at a post. He might be the supervisory officer for somebody doing that, but he won't actually be the hands-on man. You've got to be really very good and very, very ambitious to catch up and then keep on a par with your fast-stream colleagues. And it depends whether you want to do that. I never have. Simply because I don't want the sort of jobs that go with that sort of fast-stream thing. I'm much happier doing management and consular type things, the jobs that are traditionally the mainstream jobs, rather than the think pieces.
Determined to win his fight with the Miami office, the Atlanta Consul General joins the inspectors for the meeting that will resolve the conflict.
Although we haven't made up our mind, and whatever we recommend will only be a recommendation for subsequent confirmation, our mind is nonetheless moving, ever more clearly in the direction of setting up an office in Orlando.
I don't want to enter an argument with you. My view and my opinion is that the consular office for consular work would be better established down here. I'm not so sure where.
Why do you think it would be better established down here, away from where the bulk of the demand arises?
Well, I don't know where the figures have come from.
The figures are the figures that this post has provided. I mean, they speak for themselves.
But we don't do it. But we don't know by location when we get all the calls and all the kind of things in.
But the paperwork when Atlanta have to send out forms and what have you for replacement passports and what have you. I mean, they are posting them to some addresses in Orlando.
But we do. I mean, our indications are that most of the work is down here. However, I don't want to kind of.
I mean, the issue, Phil, is simple. The work is done in Atlanta because it's set up to be done in Atlanta, and the statistics of that work speak for themselves.
Okay. Well,
I don't think there's anything else to say about it, quite honestly.
My view is that you've got a perfectly lovely building with space to move into here. But if you have it in Orlando, fine. I shall not make a fuss about that, okay? It's actually a pain in the backside to be inspected, I can tell you. The work that you put into it beforehand, the amount of time that we spent getting these offices looking nice and clean and tidy, for example. It's a hard slog being inspected, because you work year in, year out thinking that you're doing good, you're working hard for HMG, you're doing business for HMG, and we do a lot of business here in Florida for British companies, on behalf of British companies, that could all be suddenly vanquished by the visit of the inspectors, who could simply say, well, quite frankly, we don't think you need an office in Florida. So no, it's a hard work, and I'll be glad when the inspectors fly out of here, I can tell you.
There's a lovely feeling at the end of each inspection of finishing a job and having an empty tray. And that's something you don't often experience in the Foreign Service, probably the whole civil service, of coming to the bottom of your in-tray. Just being able to say, right, that's a job done, completed, finished, apart from the debriefing exercise.
The inspectors have made 74 recommendations, including cutting a number of senior posts in Washington. Most of their proposals have been reluctantly accepted by the ambassador. But some job cuts have met strong resistance, both in the Foreign Office and across Whitehall. The inspectors must now defend their case at a final meeting.
The sense here is that this is a less high priority than some others, and that therefore this is one which we can afford to drop, whereas there are obviously many others that we can't.
Well, that's where our views differ. If you take the proposal to do away with the Minister Trade Policy and the Scientific Counsellor and the Press Counsellor, the inspectors tell us that there is spare capacity and that the functions attributed to those 3 posts can be reallocated without serious loss of output. I think that we're going too far, frankly.
It is extremely important that we should preserve the right degree of access on the Hill, and I fear that the merged councillor proposal with the congressional work pushed down to a DS5 is going to be an unsatisfactory structure if we really need to call in the chips on the Hill. I'm thinking of a situation like the Falklands War or indeed a really greatly increased EC-US tension on trade issues.
It seems to us a perverse and bad time to be cutting back the science and technology representation in Washington at precisely the time when the US administration is attaching more importance to developing this aspect of policy.
This job was actually done the way the inspectors are now recommending in 1983. It failed, and within about 18 months, the then Consul General was back in London and the job had to be split. I think that this particular system has actually been tried and found wanting, and I don't think the DTI could remotely go along with it.
I think our judgment is that there could be other ways of finding the savings. I mean, we could probably produce equivalent savings if we thought hard about it.
I think that one cannot shield the United States from the general budgetary pressures that are on us. Inspections over the last 2 years have produced a fairly significant number of savings, and there are a lot of missions around the world which are at a less than ideal level of staffing.
It is a convention that all inspectors' tours end with a visit to the permanent Under-Secretary. The meetings reinforce their authority and help the PUS to gauge the morale of his staff overseas.
Well, it's just I feel as if I've got a red face.
Would you like to come in, please?
Fierce opposition from New York and the DTI in London thwarted the inspectors' proposal to cut John Thompson's job in New York. Most of their other recommendations survived. The UN mission received more staff, the Orlando Consular Office was approved, and 2 local staff lost their jobs in Atlanta. Among the many other job cuts was that of press counsellor in Washington, the man whose bottled water claim had so worried the inspectors. The rules on bottled water remain unchanged.
What I wanted to say was to all of you, congratulations, because it's obviously been a very tough report. I think I'm right in saying that the manpower cut is about 8%, and the cost saving is about 5% of the overall cost.
That's right, it's nearly $1 million in terms of running cost savings, which is 5% of the total cost of the representation in the United States. So it's a pretty big saving.
Very big saving. So thank you very much for having no doubt braved several onslaughts, both at out in the field in the States and of course back here when you're talking to departments who I've no doubt protested strongly at tampering with their bailiwicks. I don't think any of us need to be under any illusion. We're not cutting into flab on the machine, we're cutting into the activities, and in an area of crucial importance to us. Could we turn to...
I don't stand and wave the flag madly, but I still think that Britain has got a great deal to offer. I still think that there is something very special. Our history is special. I think we've got a contribution to pay in world terms. I think that Britain is, generally speaking, very well respected for its skill at international politics. Yes, of course, we look after our own corner, but not quite so blatantly as most other countries. If you weren't patriotic, don't bother to join the Foreign Office, because you'll be a fish out of water. You wouldn't be doing it unless you were proud to be British and proud to be representing your country. If you're not, forget it. Go somewhere else. Go, do whatever, but don't bother us. We don't want you.
There's a unique insight into the workings of the Foreign Office in this new BBC book to accompany the series.
In the second Roads Around Britain, catch up with me slaving over a hot stove in Norfolk. Well, that tart must be cooked by now. I get to taste some exotic mushrooms.
There's only one word to describe this. Magic.
And make a road sausage that's the talk of the town.
$24.99, please.
So join me for Roads Around Britain, Tuesday, 8:30, BBC Two. And no, I didn't get to keep the car.
This is the tale of a most unusual vintner. Being a Muslim, Zubair Mohammed wasn't exactly brought up to drink wine. But now, at 29, he runs a wine company that's one of Scotland's most respected, even though he operates from what's basically a cubbyhole at the back of his father's flower shop.
Okay, that's a good idea. So he's bringing over some Chevalier 81 for me, right?
Zubair, the youngest and most indulged of four brothers, still lives with his parents just along the street.
Well, if they were sweeties, then.
He lasted one day at Heriot Watt University and was, by his own admission, a layabout until he got the wine bug 6 years ago, falling in love with the sheer excitement of wines with real character and quality.
54 and 10.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good. Bye.
Bye.
That's lovely. I'll send that off to you in the next day or so.
Now he's a more energetic wine merchant than most, specially importing some bottles thousands of miles to a bothy where he admits the stock keeping is
fairly haphazard. Because I'm an enthusiast, I tend to buy things that I like very much, and I have to work out where I'm going to sell them. I eventually get round to that, but it can take a bit of time. It's a bit haphazard. It's not run like, a serious accountant would run a business. I do my best, but wine's not that kind of thing. I mean, especially when you're dealing with small growers in Burgundy, if you get a release, or even in some of the newer ones, if you get a release, if you don't take it, then they're not going to keep it for you. You've got to take it then. And obviously they think that because you can take it then, you can sell it. Which it doesn't always sort of roll on like that. It'd be nice if it did, because that way you'd keep the accountant happy as well as yourself,
How do you feel about having your flower shop invaded by all this wine?
I don't take it very kindly, but I have to accept it.
Now, you do Zubair's accounts, don't you?
Yes, I do.
How's he doing?
Very well. Very well. I'm quite happy with how the things are progressing. Although it's a slow progress, but it's very satisfactory.
Oh, it's not too bad. It's up and down, but it's not like last year.
Wine being what it is, the contacts he's made, I think they're working very well.
Well, I'm very impressed.
Yes, although I find, not that I know very much about the wine, but I find when I read the wine connoisseurs, I get a bit suspicious. Why one says it tastes like black currants, the other says it's peaty. I don't understand that.
It's a very, very fair criticism, yeah.
I wish I could know, but since I don't drink, so I can't make any comment on it. The only time I had when a bit of brandy was in 1950s, but didn't go very well up with my sickness. I just was more sick. So after that, I haven't known anything about it.
With at least 6 good wine merchants, Edinburgh's probably the most competitive wine market in Britain. One of the best of Zubair's vital restaurant customers is the Vintners Rooms in Leith, where the vaults have been used for storing wine for at least 400 years. So a deeply unfashionable rosé.
Yep. Rosé wines generally are fairly, looked down upon, especially by the cognoscenti, but